All right. Thank you guys very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Everybody look at your feet right now. Are you proud of your shoes? Maybe you need to buy another pair. My name is Andy Polk. I'm with the Footwear Distributors and Retailers of America. It's a lot of words there, but it's FDRA. We basically represent about 95% of all shoe companies in the US, many brands in Europe and in Asia. And it represents slippers, heels, athletic, casual, etc. And so I'm here today to help talk a little bit about footwear and the need for bio applications for footwear in particular. I lead the footwear industry sustainability working group, so I help brands, factories, experts, and academics come together. So we're a collective action group that help bring people together, share ideas, and work on projects together. The panel today is particularly going to give some insight into the footwear industry's progress towards sustainability. We'll talk about footwear as a product so you better understand it, because I don't think many people understand the complexities and uses of footwear. We'll also talk about biomaterials being used in our bio needs. And we'll talk about where the shoe industry is heading in terms of its bio and larger sustainability journey. So it should be very fascinating because everyone here today has shoes. I checked when I walked in. So just some background as we jump into this. We do an annual survey of shoe professionals, and 41% of shoe companies are using more bio-based materials in 2022 than they did in 2021, so there is growth. 44% said they plan to increase their use of biomaterials this year. So every year they're increasing about 40% usage where they can. And with 24 billion pairs made a year, 22 to 24, about 66 million pairs of shoes made every single day on this planet, there's a large scalable application for bio that many people don't know or didn't understand. We're using a number of different bio-based and natural materials: sugarcane, algae, natural rubber, corn, castor beans, mushrooms, which we heard today. But not all bio applications work for shoes currently. We have a lot of problems and challenges around performance and cost, et cetera. And so that's why we have this panel today to talk about some of these issues. So I think I've teed it up well. I'm going to start with, let's see, Nicolo is here on the end. Just quickly, each of you introduce yourselves very quickly, and then we'll get into the questions.
Thank you, Andy, and hi, everybody. I am Nicolo Giusti. I'm working for Hilfiger, sourcing and production, and very much involved in sustainability innovation of the material. So thanks for the invite.
Charlotte Herdt, bonjour everyone. I'm in charge of the sustainability-related projects for the specialty polyamides at Arkema. So I have a very nice job because we already have a high-performance bio-based polyamide in our portfolio. The idea is how to bring more of this to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gayatri Keskar. I know this is the last panel discussion before lunch break, so we'll try to make it as spicy and as flavorful as possible. I'm leading the research team at Material ConneXion, where we are building an ecosystem of enabling technologies through our innovation materials library database, as well as providing best practices and toolkit for brands, empowering them to make right decisions for their own supply chains as well as end consumers.
So this panel is great because there's a lot of wisdom here, and that's a lot of what we talk about nowadays is sustainable wisdom, right? Not just making a choice, but making the right choice based on a number of different factors. So I'm going to start off with Nicolo because footwear is a very complex product. There could be 60 different material types that go into a shoe. It could be 120 different touches on the shoe on a production line. Materials can come from 4 different continents, exchanged in 8 different currencies to make the shoes that are on your feet today. But it's got to perform as well, right? Every time we push down on the shoe, we want it to make sure that it continues down the block. And maybe you can share some of those complexities around the midsole, outsole especially, and then we can kind of get into some of the bio issues that we see with that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. It is a monster. Shoes is a monster. When I work for apparel company, I mean PVH as Tommy Hilfiger and Calvin Klein, most of our business is apparel, of course. And then when we start the discussion in footwear, we always like, okay, they are footwear. It's very difficult because, of course, when in apparel you have just few components, and you make that sustainable, and there's already a sustainable product. While in footwear, as Andy said, you may have till 60 components. You can start from the upper, the lining, the insock, and the outsole. These are the 4 main components we consider when we also talk about sustainability. But there is a word inside. There is all the reinforcement to make sure that your walking is comfortable, to make sure that the shoes doesn't fall apart. So during the years, we look into more and more sustainable alternative. Of course, leather is one of the main materials, especially for the upper, is one of the most durable material. But we look into what are the bio-based alternative. There are some bio-based PU, partially bio-based PU that you can use for uppers. Still, the price is very challenging. It's not a commercial at all. So when you go into a mass market, it's still big impact. But what we have to think is that the rest of the shoes, more than 50% of the shoes, we did this calculation with the sustainability team, considering all the prototype we have in footwear between flip-flop, boots, sneaker, and so on, more than 50% of the weight of the shoes is made out of the outsole. And most of the time, the outsole is made out of synthetic rubber, so synthetic material. And if this could be transfer or if we can find a bio-based solution for that, it can be a huge impact, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, but we have about 25 to 30 billion pair of shoes per year that we produce. That is about almost 30 billion pair of outsole that we produce. So it's a huge market out there, and there is not many solutions in terms of bio-based. Yes, recycled options are there, also the business is already option, but bio-based, there's really not much out there.
Yeah, as an industry, I think we've leaned into recycled content heavily because it's easier to do. When it comes to bio, the footwear industry obviously doesn't have scientists and a lot of chemists traditionally in the industry, so the knowledge is growing, but it's still lacking. And I think as a percent on the shoe, if you divide it up, the midsole, outsole, the bottom of the shoe, maybe can get 50, if you're talking about a walking shoe, maybe 15% bio-based, maybe 20%. But the challenge becomes the durability factor, right? Should these shoes last 3 months? Should they last a year? Should they last 3 years? So if you're thinking about bio, the start was castor beans, and the oil in the castor beans started to compress, and the shoe would last 4 months, and then people would get upset that their shoe didn't last as long as they thought it could, even though you made a more sustainable shoe than before. So I think there's a large challenge with that, and I think, if you want to dive into that too, Nicolo, we can go down and dive right into the bio side of some of those things. But, is that also what you're seeing internally when you're thinking about performance versus the percents?
Of course. When we look also into algae, into to use for flip-flop and pull slide, that's easy because it's a 100% EVA material. But still, we cannot go above this 10-15% because the performance is not gonna be good. You want to wear your shoes as long as possible.
Right.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to be sustainable, and you have to buy 4 times the amount of product you have to. You should buy normally. So.
And Charlotte, is that the same kind of conversations you're having with brands as well around thinking about this and having strategy around what you're doing?
Definitely, and that's been already mentioned in few other talks before. I like the idea of a bio-based or bio-better materials, because that's what we want to bring. Just going bio, if you don't look at the full life cycle, and we can discuss about the upstream impacts outside of the carbon footprint next, but if the shoe is not durable enough, that doesn't make sense to go bio. So you need to perform and probably to overperform, because there's also this question that's been already raised about overcost. Technologies are not as mature. Raw materials require more work, probably. So you need to make it worthwhile. And developing the right materials may be a challenge. Maybe because the shoe industry relies heavily on materials that are more smaller volume towards the rest of the material industry. Rubber is not a big material in the material scope, but for shoes it's vital. So you may have this discrepancy here. that requires extra attention.
Yeah, and the other thing too, when we were talking about, in the pre-panel discussion, you brought up was very important, were these new rules that brands are increasingly asking bio companies, right? Like things that we normally wouldn't ask a fossil fuel-based plastic company, but we're asking these new increasing things, and a lot of that is driven by regulation around traceability. And maybe you can speak to that really quickly.
Yes, in Europe, it's a very strong regulatory constraint that's coming up. Maybe not so much in other areas yet. It's been probably driven by the history of biofuels. That's also been touched upon in a previous conference. But I sometimes receive requests about the food traceability, the deforestation, how much people paid, the biodiversity impacts. And if I am asked the same questions about our fossil-based materials, I don't know the answer, actually. And I'm not sure someone fully does. So we're also facing this extra attention because we are disrupting the business as usual. So we want to make sure we go in the right direction. But that can be a lot of tricky questions from the get-go that you add to new technologies and new raw materials and new supply chains. So it's a lot to take in for the bioeconomy.
Yeah, great points. Gayatri, I want to get to you as well around defining bio-based materials. In our industry, is it 100% bio-based? Is it a percent? Is it natural? Is it organic? Like these terms become very loaded terms that we're dealing with, and they get very confused. So maybe you can talk about how companies are looking at bio-based materials and talking about those, and maybe how many of these companies who may be making bio applications for footwear should be informing or talking to those companies as well.
That's a great question. I would say most of the times when we are referring to biomaterials, it's certainly about one or more ingredients that are used in the chemistry or the formulation of the material coming from renewable feedstock or renewable raw material. And unfortunately, most of these conversations limit themselves to just the beginning of life, again, the material manufacturing side of the life. But then there is equally important part to this equation is the end of life, what happens to those materials when the product is no longer in use. And that's where the biomaterials can also play a huge role, not just reducing the carbon emissions because you are using a renewable feedstock, but what is going to be the end of life? Is it going to follow the natural or biological cycle in terms of something that can naturally degrade? Again, there are a lot of misconceptions or lack of clarity in terms of how you define that environment. Is that going to be degrading in the natural environment that you will find in your backyard versus something that will have to be degraded into a much controlled environment that will be in industrial composting environment? Or is it something that is going to degrade if it's going to landfill, which is most likely where most of these shoes will end up in, given the fact that we mentioned in the beginning that there are 60 different components that are put together. And unfortunately, the chemistry of each of these materials doesn't necessarily match to have one solution that will be, again, compatible for the entire shoe. So there are different aspects that we need to take into account when we are defining this bio-based material. Again, are we focusing specifically just on the beginning of life, where most of the materials that are described under the bio-based materials will fall? Or we are also looking into materials that are going to provide that biological cycle towards the end of life. And so that's why when you are looking into applications, we want to make sure, especially for footwear, again, as I said, it's very challenging because all these different materials put together come from different chemistries, and there is not going to be an easy pathway in order to have a preferred end of life. But at least if we are able to find solutions that follow similar chemistry, so are we able to use maybe all natural-based materials that can then eventually be put into an environment that will, again, naturally biodegrade? Or if not, can we use all materials coming from the synthetic? But again, biosynthetic is another area which Arkema is very well known for and have very interesting offerings that are able to use renewable feedstock, but they provide a performance of synthetic materials. And if you try to maintain the same chemistry, maybe we can recycle them and bring value out of that following the technological cycle.
And I should ask both you and Charlotte, the conversation you have with brands around needing bio or desiring bio. From 2 years ago to today, how much more are you hearing it? I think folks want to know, is there real demand from footwear companies and brands, et cetera?
So in our experience, certainly we have seen a lot more interest than 2 years ago in terms of using biomaterials.
Yeah.
Again, the great news for companies working or looking to work in this space is the definition of biomaterials, or in general bioeconomy, as we have been hearing throughout this morning, has expanded a lot. The role of biomaterials that was traditionally considered, again, just basically for the product manufacturing, is also playing a role, as we learned about different microbes, microorganisms that can also help with the end of life. So it is much more holistic conversation in terms of how these biomaterials can be used during material synthesis, during product manufacturing, in order to improve the usage, as we heard from Modern Meadow, in terms of improving the mechanical performance, but at the same time also trying to create a product that will have a better end of life as well.
Yeah.
Actually, we see a different type of people asking for bio. So more people asking for it, but probably a different take. People who were asking for it 2 years ago or even before were pretty advanced in their thinking and came with very deep questions. And have some people who want to jump on the bio wagon, but they don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So it's more difficult questions, actually, because we also have to guide them, share our knowledge so that they can decide the best fits. There are also some of them who had this bio cold shower. They want a biomaterial, and when they look deeper into the LCA, they realize there are some problems. It's not as good as the cheap commodity materials they were using, and that's fine. You need the right tool. You need the right material for the right use. So sometimes we get out of discussion, and it's not a deal, but at least they learn something, and then they ask questions to a more relevant supplier, to the more relevant type of materials.
Yeah.
So it's more time consuming, those new requests.
Yeah.
But it's good that they happen.
It's interesting you say that, because I think, even 3 years ago, the focus for a lot of companies, and maybe this is a marketing generated side, but was we need 15% bio-based in this product. And it's like, why? What, like, this is why do you want to do that? Like, it's great for the planet, I understand that, but like, why not 5? Why not 50% bio? Like, what's the what? And it come to find out, it was just they were just shooting arrows in the dark, trying to find their way and try to use something and do a little bit better. There was no strategy to it. I feel like advanced to today, we have companies who have some guidelines, who have some strategies. Nicolo, I know we just met in Amsterdam, had a great conversation for a couple of hours about all these different ideas and things that you and others in PVH are working on, and then more broadly in industry. But maybe you can speak to just the growth of strategy now, where, as Charlotte said, now we're looking at LCAs, right? The percents are great to have, but now we're actually like having to prove that this is better than what is traditionally happened with water, with soil, with et cetera.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. And also what I want to highlight, Andy, fashion is a little bit different industry that most of the people we see around today. I mean, we play a lot with marketing. You have seen in the past years a lot of marketing campaign on mycelium. Like 2 years ago, everybody goes out with mycelium material. Now you should go in the shop, it should be only mycelium material. How many people are wearing mycelium shoes? Right. So it's all about communication, or this every material, every bio-based need to come from a certain raw material that need to be fancy, from grape waste, apple waste. We were actually the first one started 3 years ago with apple waste, then grape waste, then cactus. Now there's always fancy story. This is to say fashion is really related to the way how you can marketing, how you can sell it outside. But if going back to your question, if I translate this into the strategy of the company, that's selling is the fundamental part, but is also more important to do what you are saying, to measure the impact. Likely, regulation are coming in place. So all the cowboys that have been there until now saying everything is sustainable and showing off impressive image out there that doesn't exist, Now they really have to prove. So we really have to look into LCA in the right way, because there's way into make LCA. Likely we have a good sustainability team that is really keen on that and is looking in all the data. And it's not only about CO2 emission, it's also about water, it's also about all the impact from the beginning until the end. Where is the feedstock coming from? Is it a waste feedstock, or is it something you have to produce to make the biomaterial? So I think we are going step by step to transparency through LCA, but also to physical traceability of all the materials, all these 30, 40 components you have in the shoes. You need to prove where it's coming from. Otherwise, it's just hair.
Right. And I think that for folks out there who are making bio applications for industries, for the footwear side, and maybe you have it from others as well, that's what you're going to start to hear from a lot of companies is, do you have an LCA? Do you have an impact report? Like, show me the water usage, show me the energy usage. Like, I have to prove this to my boss. We now have rules in place. And then, you might say, well, why do you need this? Well, my boss told me to. There's a rule in place. Somebody set this guideline, or they set this line, and we can't, go past this area, or we need to do this in particular. So be aware of that. And I asked some brands before I came to the conference. I was like, what should I ask companies working on bio, whether it's startup or scale or whatever? And they were like, prove to me that this material is not just bio-based, but is better for the planet, right, than what we're using right now. So it's getting to that point where it's not just the 20% for the marketing, but it's actually like, we actually do have to do this now. And so I think it's a different thing. I want to flip it to the new buzzwords that we're hearing a lot around: renewable and regenerative. What people are talking about now, what we were talking about sustainability 5 years ago, now we're increasingly talking about regenerative. And so, Charlotte, I'll start with you, and then I'll come to you, Gayatri, around, explain a little bit about what brands are thinking about around renewable materials in the feedstock. And Nicolo spoke to that just a second ago. But I think it's important that, it's not just the chemistry that goes into it that a lot of people focus on in their sales pitches or in whatever, but now we're getting into the origins. So maybe you can speak to that really quickly.
Yes, so as you mentioned a while ago, bio was enough, and now it's more what type of raw material you use, and then is it a crop, is it a waste, is it vegan or not, and in types of crops, then it's, prove it's more sustainable, with this regenerative agriculture being a huge buzzword those days. And actually, it's like the bio-based 2 years ago. Many people do not fully understand the concept, think like it's a good idea, want to get in, but there is little guidance on what it specifically is, what are the rules of the games. So we are trying also, to navigate this jungle and see how we can steer our bio-based feedstock towards these regenerative practices, agriculture.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, when you talk about it, you end up with best agricultural practices that were the old ones. When things back in the very, very old days, things were sustainable because people were living with less.
Right.
And you wanted your land to last forever so that you can pass it on. You wanted to pass it on to your children and grandchildren, so of course you would pay attention not to degrade it because you had no chemical entrance to help recoup what you took. So we are coming back to this. Those are probably what the regenerative landscape is looking at, which also raised the question of doing with less, because then you're talking about less yield from the land, but using more land in a better way. So finding the right metric would be a challenge here again.
We have a thing in America for the restaurants for the last 5 years. The craze has been farm to table. It's like knowing where you get your food from, and it's local farm, and it comes in. And now we're talking about farm to footwear, right? Knowing where the ingredients come from the farm, all the way through. So I think that's very interesting. And then I also want to, you can chime in too about the renewable and the feedstock. But I know you have interestingly been looking at new tech and innovations in this space as well. So I want to give you time, particularly to talk about maybe where we're heading and what you see in your role.
Certainly. So talking about regenerative, again, as mentioned before, it's not a new concept. It's a century-old concept, and everyone in the past was using it. But certainly there is renewed interest in that and trying to see, given the current situation or circumstance we are in, how we can move away from the chemical-intensive practices that are currently carried out in order to improve the soil health, because now people have started understanding the importance of maintaining the soil health for your crops and ultimately for the feedstock. Also, I wanted to reiterate that not all biomaterials are same. As we discussed before, not just based on the properties that they offer, but the feedstock where they are coming from. And we already talked about, whether it's the first generation, second generation, so whether it's coming from the waste of the agricultural crops. Also seeing interest trying to the new technologies that we are seeing, that some of the other waste streams, it doesn't necessarily have to be agricultural waste, but what about CO2, which we have abundantly available. That's one of the challenges or problems, how we can start like reusing or capturing and repurposing it as a feedstock in order to make some of these new chemicals or new raw materials that can be used. I mean, certainly some of these new technologies are still in the development stage, and I guess so that's one of the nuance of the bio industry in general, that it takes longer because you're working with nature. It's not like a chemistry that you can just, make things work that you want to. I know it was also discussed this morning that you want to work with what's out there and how you can cooperate with it in order to get to the properties that you're looking for. So certainly the main important aspect to keep in mind in case of chemistry, irrespective of which feedstock you're using, is if you want to make, I'm going to throw in another terminology, in circular. If you want to make your product circular, you want to use green chemistry. Because unless and until it's green, it doesn't have, and I know that green is a word that has been used so often and has maybe lost its context. But what I'm looking, or what I'm trying to say is the safe chemistry. Unless and until it's safe, the product is not going to be circular, irrespective of the product design, irrespective of what materials you use. So certainly that's where learning from nature, taking inspiration, and obviously the resources that we find in nature are going to play a huge role. The other thing I also wanted to point out is, as we are working with these new materials, the other important thing to keep in mind is maybe we need to change the processing methods that we are using with these new materials. And we have already started seeing interest in new technologies in terms of 3D printing, additive manufacturing. There have been companies who are trying to use these digital technologies or platforms in order to reduce the amount of waste that is created, in order to have more design flexibility or move or pass beyond the processing techniques that are currently available in order to provide more seamless integration, but as well as making sure that it is easier to dispose of towards the end of life.
That's a great point. And just so if you wanted to dive into some of those technologies, what would be interesting is to follow the footwearists, Nicoline Van Enter, originally from Walwick. She's probably from somewhere else, but Nicoline has worked in the shoe industry, constructing shoes on a plant. She's developed her own biomaterials. They have a 3D printing lab in Barcelona right now where they're incorporating bio with the 3D printing. So they're testing all these applications out. So this is not something that you're sharing that's like pie. This is actually like in the lab right now being developed. And I think it's going to be fascinating how we can automate our processes. So we talked a lot about materials, but our construction of footwear is quite antiquated. It looks like a car manufacturing facility that goes step by step down the line. Still, there are more robotics happening, but having 3D and these other technologies starting to come in can make a real difference. We just have a couple more minutes. Did I miss anything that you guys want to speak to and share anything before we wrap it? Yes.
I think one other difference of footwear industry, fashion industry also in general, is that we change very fast.
Yes.
And we need colors. We need update. Every 3 months, we need to have something new. When you are lucky, 3 months, because now there are brands that every week are coming with something new. So we need to match this, that is a design feature, with the technology. We have designer coming and merchandiser coming in. Can you give us a sustainable material of the season? They do not understand that when you get into a part of biomaterial, this is a part that goes for years. you don't change every season the feedstock, right?
Right.
So that's, I think, is an important part that we need to instruct and educate our customer and our team also how to work. But that we need the support of this world to teach them where we should work, where we should get a good, new, sustainable bio-based material for outsole, for example.
Yeah, great points. All right, I think that's our panel discussion. To kind of summarize, footwear is a huge opportunity. Big shoe is a huge opportunity for bio applications. It's complicated. We have a complicated product, so it's not going to be easy, but it can scale as an application in footwear. There are going to be a lot more questions for bio applications than traditional materials because of traceability and new rules. And as we said, even going down to the farm level and the feedstock level, asking these really interesting questions. So as you start to work with footwear companies, think about these questions you may get asked, not just what percent, but like how really sustainable it is, what's the impact, things like this. But there is a growing request and demand from footwear companies. Just like I said, over half the industry is looking for bio solutions. We've kind of stagnated a little bit because of the technology, and this is where we really need folks' help. The technology has kind of stagnated because of performance. We can get a certain percent out, but we need to scale that and get higher to make a difference in our industry for the planet. And so I want to thank our speakers today for helping share some of those ideas and sustainable wisdom as we had. And I want to encourage all of you to meet with them while you're here and talk about footwear as an application, other things also that they work with. But I want to thank you guys for your time and your wisdom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.